In the early 1930s, as major naval powers restructured their strategies around emerging technologies, the British Royal Navy faced a crucial gap in its fleet air arm capabilities. The era of the dreadnought had shifted toward one of carrier-based warfare, and yet the United Kingdom lacked a reliable torpedo bomber that could serve with both range and precision. At the time, the Royal Navy's aerial doctrine was still evolving, balancing between reconnaissance, strike capability, and fleet coordination. Against this backdrop, the Air Ministry issued Specification ES 33, a requirement for a 3-seat aircraft capable of carrying torpedoes or bombs, with secondary reconnaissance capabilities, and able to operate from aircraft carriers or shore bases. The responsibility for this challenge fell to the Fairey Aviation Company, already an established contributor to British naval aviation. Founded by Charles Richard Fairey, the company had developed several successful naval aircraft, including the Fairey 3 series. For the new requirement, Fairey assembled a team led by designer Marcel Lobel, a Belgian-born engineer with a reputation for practical, if conservative, designs. Lobel's approach was characteristic of interwar thinking. Rather than pursuing advanced monoplane concepts, he opted for a biplane layout. The biplane configuration, though increasingly outdated by contemporary standards, offered key advantages: low-speed handling, short takeoff distance, structural simplicity, and resilience in the demanding conditions of carrier operations. The proposed design, originally designated TSR-1 for Torpedo Spotter Reconnaissance, embodied these principles. Its unequal span wings folded for compact storage aboard ships, while its fixed undercarriage, partially faired with large spats, enabled sturdy landings on carrier decks. Power came from a Bristol Pegasus 3000 Fairey radial engine, producing around 635 horsepower, and the airframe was constructed using a mix of metal tubing and fabric covering. The cockpit layout featured 3 separate stations: pilot at the front, observer, navigator amidships, and rear gunner at the back. Each had clear fields of operation, though the crew positions were not enclosed, a compromise that would later affect operational endurance in harsh climates. The strategic thinking behind such a design was shaped by British naval traditions. The Royal Navy emphasized reconnaissance and night operations as much as direct offensive capability. The Swordfish's structure and instrumentation were therefore tuned for low-speed patrols, long loiter time, and stability over the open sea. In many respects, the aircraft was built more for endurance and reliability than for speed or agility. The broader international context also influenced the Swordfish's inception. In the early 1930s, Japan was expanding its naval reach in the Pacific, and Germany, though constrained by the Treaty of Versailles, was quietly rebuilding its military infrastructure. British naval planners were wary of potential conflict scenarios in distant theaters where air power would need to support maritime interdiction, convoy protection, and amphibious operations. The Fairey Swordfish was envisioned as a versatile workhorse that could operate across multiple roles, dropping torpedoes, laying mines, spotting for naval gunnery, and conducting photographic reconnaissance. Despite the cautious nature of the design, the Air Ministry approved the concept for further development. This decision reflected not only institutional conservatism, but also a strategic emphasis on proven, robust platforms. At a time when budgetary constraints still shaped post-depression military policy, the idea of a multi-role aircraft that could adapt to evolving missions had significant appeal. The Swordfish project thus moved forward, with prototype construction commencing in 1933. Few at the time could have imagined that this seemingly anachronistic biplane would become one of the most iconic aircraft of the Second World War. Its slow speed and antiquated appearance masked a tactical effectiveness that would soon be demonstrated in the most improbable of victories. But before the Swordfish could prove itself in combat, it had to undergo a rigorous phase of prototyping, testing, and acceptance into service. A phase that would test both its structural resilience and the Royal Navy's faith in its designers. The first prototype of the Fairey Swordfish, designated TSR Iron, took to the air for its maiden flight in April 1934 from Fairey's Great West Aerodrome, a precursor to what would later become Heathrow Airport. Despite its dated biplane appearance, early results were promising. The aircraft demonstrated excellent low-speed stability, easy handling characteristics, and impressive endurance, all of which were critical for the Royal Navy's requirements. The folding wings mechanism operated smoothly, a necessity for cramped carrier hangars, and the fixed undercarriage proved resilient during repeated hard landings, simulating rough deck operations. During initial testing, however, a number of limitations surfaced. The open cockpits exposed crews to harsh elements, particularly during North Atlantic operations, and the aircraft's maximum speed, barely above 130 miles per hour, was already considered sluggish. Nonetheless, Fairey engineers and Royal Navy observers shared an appreciation for the aircraft's maneuverability at low speeds, which allowed for precise torpedo runs and tight navigation over water. These traits would later prove crucial at its frontline missions. Following the TSR-I tests, Fairey was granted approval to build a second prototype, TSR-U2, with improved features. This iteration incorporated a slightly more powerful Pegasus engine and minor modifications to improve reliability. The development also included updated radio equipment and instrumentation suitable for night operations. The trials of TSR-2 began in earnest by mid-1934 and continued into the following year. As more data accumulated, confidence in the aircraft grew, leading the Air Ministry to issue Specification S-3834, formally ordering the aircraft into production under the name Swordfish. Mass production began at Fairey's Hayes facility and was later supplemented by Blackburn Aircraft under contract to meet growing wartime demands. This collaboration would prove essential when hostilities escalated, ensuring consistent delivery of airframes to meet naval requirements. The Swordfish MCI entered service in 1936, armed with a forward-firing Unsurso 3 Vickers machine gun and a rear-mounted .303 Lewis or Vickers K gun. It could carry a standard 18-inch torpedo, depth charges, or bombs under its fuselage and wings, with configurations adjusted based on mission profiles. Flight testing also validated the aircraft's extraordinary load-carrying capacity. Despite its limited power plant, the Swordfish's broad wings and low stall speed enabled it to operate from short flight decks and rough airstrips while bearing a respectable weapons load. Naval observers noted its ease of handling under turbulent conditions, especially during slow-speed deck landings. In comparative tests, it outperformed several contemporaries in rough sea landings, making it ideal for convoy escort and patrol roles. The design's structural simplicity offered another operational benefit. Ground crews found the Swordfish easy to maintain and repair even under austere conditions. Fabric-covered surfaces could be patched quickly, and spare parts were relatively straightforward to manufacture. These qualities contributed to high sortie rates during combat operations, particularly from makeshift airstrips or small escort carriers. Notably, the Swordfish displayed a degree of survivability unexpected for such a slow-moving platform. During simulated attacks, the aircraft's agility at low altitudes, combined with its ability to fly below radar and flak envelopes, made it harder to target than faster but more rigid designs. This unassuming trait would later contribute directly to the success of its most famous mission, the attack on the German battleship Bismarck. By 1937, operational evaluations were underway aboard British carriers such as HMS Furious and HMS Courageous. Swordfish units conducted mock torpedo runs, deck landings, and night reconnaissance drills, building the experience base needed for war. These trials also influenced minor design changes in subsequent production models, including improved radio antennas, better cockpit lighting, and revised oil cooling systems to accommodate tropical and Arctic environments. Throughout this period, the aircraft began to earn the grudging respect of its operators. Pilots, many initially skeptical of its antiquated appearance, appreciated its forgiving flight characteristics and reliability. And naval commanders saw it as a dependable platform for long-duration patrols, particularly over vast ocean expanses where aircraft loss due to mechanical failure could be fatal. Although nobody yet envisioned the Swordfish playing a decisive role in crippling one of Germany's most feared battleships, the foundation had been laid. The stage was set for this modest biplane to prove that, in naval warfare, resilience and precision could sometimes outweigh speed and glamour. The Fairey Swordfish officially entered frontline service with the Royal Navy's Fleet Air Arm in 1936, replacing older aircraft such as the Blackburn Baffin. Its initial integration into carrier squadrons was methodical, aimed at training crews in torpedo attack profiles, reconnaissance coordination, and multi-role versatility. The aircraft was first assigned to 825 Naval Air Squadron, and over the next 2 years, additional squadrons adopted the Swordfish as standard equipment. By the outbreak of World War II in 1939, the aircraft had already become the backbone of the Royal Navy's torpedo bomber force. The early years of deployment were largely occupied with training and peacetime patrols. Exercises emphasized the unique handling characteristics of the Swordfish, its low-speed maneuverability, wide flight envelope, and ability to fly in adverse conditions with relative ease. Air crew underwent intensive training in ship-based takeoffs and landings, torpedo drops, and overwater navigation, often under difficult weather conditions around the British Isles and the Mediterranean. When war erupted, the Swordfish was initially deployed in maritime reconnaissance, convoy escort, and anti-submarine roles. Its versatility allowed it to operate from both fleet carriers and smaller escort carriers, as well as from coastal airfields. Swordfish squadrons were quickly pressed into service patrolling the English Channel and North Sea, often flying long and uneventful missions in harsh environments. However, even in these early stages, the aircraft began to show its utility in the broader naval strategy of protecting vital supply lines and monitoring enemy fleet movements. One of the aircraft's first combat successes came in April 1940 during the Norwegian campaign. Swordfish squadrons from HMS Furious and HMS Ark Royal conducted reconnaissance and attack missions against German shipping and coastal installations. Operating under challenging weather conditions and frequently encountering ground fire, Swordfish crews demonstrated the type's resilience and utility. Though losses were suffered, the aircraft's low-speed profile and nimble handling allowed it to avoid some of the heavier flak that plagued faster, less maneuverable aircraft. The aircraft's most significant early impact came later that year, during the Battle of Taranto in November 1940. In a meticulously planned night raid, Swordfish aircraft launched from HMS Illustrious struck the Italian fleet at anchor in Taranto harbor. The attack achieved stunning success. 3 Italian battleships were put out of action, 1 sunk, 2 severely damaged, while other vessels and installations were hit or disabled. The mission showcased the Swordfish's effectiveness as a torpedo platform, especially in surprise nighttime operations where its slow speed allowed for precise targeting and low-altitude ingress. The implications of the attack reverberated across naval doctrines worldwide, notably influencing Japanese planning for the attack on Pearl Harbor. Following Taranto, the Swordfish's reputation surged within the Royal Navy and beyond. Pilots began to speak with admiration of its handling qualities and rugged design, even as newer aircraft were entering service. Ground crews praised its maintainability, and naval commanders saw its potential in increasingly diverse roles. In addition to torpedo strikes, Swordfish aircraft were used for mine-laying operations, spotting for naval artillery, and launching flares during night bombardments. One particularly valuable application was anti-submarine warfare. With the Battle of the Atlantic intensifying, Swordfish aircraft began flying from merchant convoys and escort carriers, patrolling vast areas of ocean in search of U-boats. Though initially lacking in detection technology, modifications quickly followed. Radar sets, lee lights, and depth charges were added to extend the aircraft's operational reach. The Swordfish's ability to loiter over a suspected contact zone made it ideal for disrupting enemy submarine activity and protecting Allied shipping. Despite its slow speed and open cockpit configuration, the Swordfish consistently demonstrated operational flexibility. Its crews adapted to new tactics, refined their strike procedures, and learned to work in coordination with surface units. In adverse weather and under heavy fire, the aircraft held its own, often surviving missions that faster, more advanced aircraft might not. This unexpected durability, combined with a proven combat record, ensured that the Swordfish remained in frontline service even as more modern aircraft became available. By late 1941, the Fairey Swordfish was no longer just a naval utility aircraft. It had become an indispensable tool in Britain's maritime arsenal. Through combat experience, it had validated its design philosophy: simplicity, adaptability, and precision over brute speed. In the hands of skilled crews, it was evolving into a tactical cornerstone, capable of delivering results far beyond its modest appearance. The pinnacle of the Fairey Swordfish's combat career came in 1941 with its role in the hunt and destruction of the German battleship Bismarck. This singular operation demonstrated beyond any doubt the aircraft's continued relevance on a modern battlefield. In May of that year, the Bismarck, one of Nazi Germany's most powerful warships, broke into the Atlantic and posed a major threat to Allied shipping. Following the sinking of HMS Hood, the Royal Navy launched a massive operation to intercept and neutralize the German battleship before it could reach the safety of occupied France. On May 26, 1941, Swordfish aircraft from 818, 810, and 820 naval air squadrons aboard HMS Ark Royal were dispatched in waves to attack Bismarck. The weather was severe, with low clouds, high winds, and rough seas complicating flight operations. The first wave of Swordfish mistakenly attacked HMS Sheffield, a British cruiser shadowing Bismarck, due to poor communication and visibility. Fortunately, their torpedoes were equipped with newly installed magnetic detonators, many of which failed to explode, sparing the British vessel from disaster. Later that evening, the Swordfish launched a second attack, this time correctly identifying and engaging Bismarck. Flying low over the churning Atlantic in near-total darkness, the biplanes approached through a wall of anti-aircraft fire. The German defenses were formidable, with Bismarck's anti-air batteries coordinated and lethal. Nevertheless, the Swordfish pressed in, flying below the optimal depression angle of many of the battleship's guns. Despite being slow and exposed, the aircraft proved difficult to hit. The limited speed of the Swordfish worked to their advantage. Gun predictors calibrated for faster aircraft often misjudged their trajectory. One torpedo struck Bismarck's stern, jamming her rudder and steering gear. This single hit sealed the fate of the great warship. Unable to maneuver, Bismarck began to circle and lost the ability to evade pursuing British forces. By the following day, she was brought under sustained attack by British battleships and eventually scuttled by her own crew. The success of the Swordfish in this operation became legendary. Obsolete biplanes had crippled the Kriegsmarine's most fearsome surface vessel, altering the course of naval warfare and reinforcing the aircraft's mythos. Following the Bismarck engagement, the Swordfish continued to be deployed across multiple theaters. In the Mediterranean, it supported operations from carriers and land bases, harassing Axis shipping and targeting resupply convoys to North Africa. The aircraft proved particularly effective in night attacks, using the cover of darkness and its low radar profile to strike targets with minimal warning. Swordfish missions from Malta and Alexandria became routine, and despite mounting Axis air superiority, the aircraft remained an active part of the Royal Navy's striking power. In the Arctic, Swordfish aircraft played a vital role in convoy protection, often flying from escort carriers in appalling conditions. Missions above the Barents Sea were plagued by freezing temperatures, poor visibility, and limited navigational aids. Yet Swordfish crews routinely conducted reconnaissance and anti-submarine patrols to guard convoys en route to Murmansk and Arkhangelsk. The aircraft's open cockpit design was a liability in such conditions, but its rugged structure and the tenacity of its crews allowed it to endure where more sophisticated machines might have failed. A notable adaptation during this period was the implementation of rocket-assisted anti-submarine tactics. Swordfish were fitted with RP-3 rockets and tasked with suppressing surface U-boats during surprise encounters. Combined with the addition of airborne radar and Lee lights, this enhancement allowed Swordfish squadrons to attack German submarines during night operations, a critical development in the Battle of the Atlantic. The aircraft also played a supporting role during the Allied invasion of Sicily and later in the D-Day landings, conducting reconnaissance and maritime strike missions in support of amphibious operations. Its ability to loiter over coastal zones, identify naval targets, and direct naval gunfire made it a useful auxiliary asset, even as newer aircraft began to dominate the skies. Throughout these varied campaigns, the Swordfish adapted to changing battlefield conditions. Its combat utility remained rooted in simplicity and reliability, with minimal maintenance requirements and a proven ability to operate from a variety of platforms. Although the aircraft was increasingly vulnerable to enemy fighters, its missions were often conducted under cover of darkness or from remote areas, mitigating the risk. By 1943, however, the Royal Navy began replacing the Swordfish in frontline torpedo squadrons with the more modern Fairey Barracuda. Yet the Swordfish did not disappear. It continued serving in anti-submarine squadrons, training units, and even with the Royal Canadian Navy. In the face of technological obsolescence, It clung to relevance through mission-specific utility, operating in niches where no alternative had yet proven superior. Its service history up to this point was already extraordinary, and its contributions far from over. As the Fairey Swordfish aged into the middle years of the war, it underwent several waves of modification and adaptation. These changes were not merely incremental updates, but essential transformations that kept the aircraft relevant in evolving theaters of conflict. The aircraft that had first entered service in 1936 bore a significant technological gap compared to its contemporaries by 1942, but the ongoing need for a dependable, shipborne platform meant that instead of being retired outright, the Swordfish was continuously upgraded. The original Swordfish Makiwife was built around a Bristol Pegasus III engine, producing around 690 horsepower. While adequate in the mid-1930s, by the early 1940s, this output was insufficient, especially as payloads increased with new mission types such as anti-submarine warfare. To compensate, the Swordfish Mk Diasandu was introduced. This version featured a more powerful Pegasus XXX engine, generating over 750 horsepower, and more importantly, metal lower wings to allow the carriage of rocket projectiles. This upgrade opened a new dimension for the Swordfish, allowing it to perform suppression attacks against surface submarines and coastal targets with greater effectiveness. The addition of rocket rails beneath the wings enabled the aircraft to carry RP-3 rockets, a significant enhancement in offensive capability. These unguided munitions were effective against submarines, small surface vessels, and static coastal targets, compensating for the aircraft's low speed with a powerful standoff weapon. Coupled with radar and improved night navigation systems, the Mk Kisun became a formidable tool in the struggle for control over the Atlantic supply lines. Soon after, the Swordfish Mk III was introduced. This variant featured the most significant technological leap in this, a large, bulbous ASV, air-to-surface vessel, radar dome mounted beneath the fuselage. While it caused additional drag and further reduced the already modest top speed, it allowed the aircraft to detect enemy submarines and surface ships in low visibility conditions, day or night. The integration of radar made Swordfish patrols substantially more effective during night convoy escort missions, particularly in the mid-Atlantic Gap, where land-based radar coverage was unavailable. Another key innovation during the Mk3 phase was the installation of LAE lights, powerful searchlights mounted beneath the wing, synchronized with the radar system. Upon detecting a U-boat, the pilot could activate the LAE light in the final seconds of the approach, illuminating the target and reducing the submarine's chance to dive. These combined technologies made Swordfish squadrons critical assets in the destruction of the German U-boat fleet during the later phases of the Battle of the Atlantic. In parallel with combat upgrades, the Swordfish also evolved in its training and auxiliary roles. The Mk4, though produced in limited numbers, was developed as a winterized version with an enclosed cockpit for Arctic operations, an attempt to address crew exposure to extreme temperatures during operations over northern waters. While it never became a standard, it demonstrated the aircraft's capacity to be adapted for specialized environments. Across all versions, efforts were made to simplify maintenance and extend the operational life of aging airframes. Field modifications became common. Crews would reinforce key structural joints, retrofit more efficient heaters, or apply improved radio equipment as technology progressed. Many squadrons incorporated minor upgrades not documented in official specifications, reflecting the decentralized and improvisational nature of wartime logistics and frontline experience. The Swordfish's simplicity remained its greatest strength throughout this period. Its airframe, built with steel tubing and covered in fabric, allowed for quick field repairs even in forward areas. Components could be replaced with relative ease, and airframes often remained airworthy far beyond their originally anticipated service lives. This robustness led to the continued production of Swordfish aircraft until 1944, well into the age of all-metal monoplanes and jet research. The total production reached nearly 2,400 units, with aircraft manufactured not only by Fairey Aviation, but also in large numbers by Blackburn Aircraft under license. This distributed production ensured a steady supply of aircraft to both home and overseas squadrons, reinforcing the type's strategic value to the Royal Navy and Commonwealth allies. Internationally, the Swordfish saw limited but notable service with other forces. The Royal Canadian Navy operated Swordfish from escort carriers in the Atlantic, often conducting joint missions with British squadrons. Several aircraft were also supplied to the Dutch Navy and operated from bases in the East Indies during the early stages of the Pacific War. Though these deployments were short-lived due to Japanese advances, they marked the Swordfish's presence in virtually all major maritime theaters of World War II. By the closing months of the war, the Swordfish was largely relegated to secondary roles: anti-submarine patrols in quieter sectors, training, and utility tasks. Yet its upgraded variants had proven that a platform originally designed in the interwar years could, with thoughtful engineering and tactical innovation, hold its own well into the most technologically advanced conflict the world had ever seen. As World War II drew to a close, the Fairey Swordfish's operational career gradually came to an end, but its legacy was already firmly established within both military aviation and naval warfare history. And despite its outwardly archaic appearance and modest specifications, the Swordfish had played a disproportionately influential role in shaping maritime combat tactics, proving that reliability, tactical versatility, and crew proficiency could often compensate for technological inferiority. By 1945, the last active combat squadrons using the Swordfish had transitioned to newer types such as the Fairey Barracuda and Grumman Avenger. These aircraft offered higher speeds, enclosed cockpits, greater payloads, and enhanced survivability. Nevertheless, the Swordfish remained in use in some auxiliary roles until the very end of the war, including in training commands and as a platform for testing new equipment or procedures. In these capacities, it continued to fly from smaller escort carriers and shore bases, providing young pilots with hands-on experience in naval aviation fundamentals. The post-war period saw a rapid decline in the aircraft's presence in frontline units. With the introduction of jet propulsion and swept-wing designs, the Swordfish became an immediate anachronism. However, its obsolescence did not diminish the reverence in which it was held by those who had flown and maintained it. Pilots spoke of its forgiving nature in the air, its astonishing ability to withstand damage, and the close camaraderie fostered by its exposed cockpit and simple controls. Ground crews remembered it as a machine that rarely failed even in adverse conditions and could be kept operational with basic tools and experience. The Swordfish quickly found a place in commemorative efforts. Surviving airframes were preserved in museums across Britain and the Commonwealth, including the Fleet Air Arm Museum in Yeovilton and the Royal Air Force Museum in London. Several aircraft were restored to flight-worthy condition in the post-war years, maintained by aviation heritage groups and displayed at air shows as symbols of wartime resilience and ingenuity. One of the most iconic preserved Swordfish, W5856, continues to fly under the Royal Navy Historic Flight, serving as a living tribute to naval aviation history. The cultural impact of the Swordfish also extended into literature, media, and public memory. Wartime newsreels and propaganda often featured the aircraft in heroic light, especially after the Taranto and Bismarck operations. Post-war histories, documentaries, and memoirs solidified its status as a symbol of British persistence and innovation. The image of a canvas-covered biplane disabling a modern battleship resonated strongly with narratives of underdog triumph and tactical cleverness, a theme often repeated in historical retrospectives. Beyond public memory, the Swordfish influenced post-war naval doctrine and aircraft design philosophies. Its operational history underscored the enduring value of carrier-based aviation and highlighted the need for multi-role flexibility in naval aircraft. Lessons learned from its successes and limitations were applied in the design of later British naval aircraft, including the Fairey Gannet and the Blackburn Buccaneer. The importance of all-weather operability, low-speed handling, and modular armament systems, all central to the Swordfish's effectiveness, remained embedded in post-war development strategy. In educational and academic circles, the Swordfish is often cited in studies of asymmetrical warfare, where limited or unconventional assets are used to achieve outsized strategic effects. Its successful application in major operations, including the disruption of Axis supply lines and the neutralization of high-value naval targets, serves as a case study in maximizing the utility of aging platforms through innovation and tactical adaptation. It also appears frequently in discussions about the evolution of naval aviation and the pivotal role of aircraft carriers in 20th century warfare. Even in the 21st century, the Swordfish continues to inspire admiration among aviation historians and enthusiasts. Its design, seemingly from another era, has become emblematic of a time when resilience, discipline, and ingenuity mattered as much as raw power or cutting-edge technology. Its combat record speaks for itself. Over 800 enemy ships damaged or sunk, more than 20 U-boats destroyed, and countless convoys protected under dangerous conditions. Ultimately, the Fairey Swordfish represents a paradox in aviation history. A slow, outdated biplane that not only survived in the most advanced conflict of its time, but excelled, leaving behind a legacy that far outstripped its humble appearance. It demonstrated that with the right doctrine, courageous crews, and operational insight, even the most modest aircraft could shape the tide of war. The Swordfish did not just serve. It endured, adapted, and triumphed in a way few aircraft of its era could claim. While the main operational history of the Fairey Swordfish is well known, from Taranto to the Atlantic convoy escorts, its lesser documented uses reveal a broader and more complex legacy. Beyond its famed exploits, the Swordfish served in numerous auxiliary, experimental, and clandestine roles that demonstrated its adaptability in unexpected ways. These forgotten chapters, though smaller in scale, contribute critical texture to the aircraft's story and highlight the Royal Navy's ability to extract value from the platform in unconventional domains. One of the more obscure uses of the Swordfish was its employment in training and simulation environments long after its frontline retirement. In Fleet Air Arm training schools across Britain and Canada, the Swordfish remained a staple into the final months of the war, helping to prepare pilots and observers for deck landings, torpedo procedures, and anti-submarine tactics. Its forgiving flight characteristics made it ideal for teaching complex maneuvers, especially in poor weather or from small carrier decks. The aircraft was also used in radar training schools, where its low speed and stable handling provided a perfect moving target for trainees to track and engage under simulated combat conditions. A little-known episode in Swordfish history includes its brief consideration for use in pilotless flight experiments. Early concepts of remote-controlled aircraft, what would later evolve into drones, saw obsolete Swordfish frames used as testbeds for rudimentary control systems. These experiments were extremely limited in scope and did not yield significant technological advances at the time. But they marked the Swordfish as one of the earliest military aircraft adapted for semi-autonomous control. In these trials, engineers attempted to direct the aircraft via radio command for short-range flight paths, often in target practice scenarios or dangerous test environments where live pilots were at risk. Additionally, Swordfish aircraft were sometimes fitted with improvised reconnaissance and photographic equipment, particularly in remote deployments where dedicated reconnaissance assets were unavailable. In the Eastern Mediterranean and Indian Ocean theaters, Swordfish units occasionally operated from isolated island bases or converted merchant vessels, performing visual and photographic surveys of enemy installations, convoy routes, and coastline defenses. These missions were rarely publicized and records are sparse, but surviving logs and pilot accounts confirm the aircraft's role in gathering intelligence in environments where more advanced aircraft could not be deployed or maintained. The Swordfish also served as a stopgap communication and courier platform in fringe theaters such as the Azores, West Africa, and even parts of Iceland. In these roles, it delivered personnel, maps, encrypted messages, and lightweight cargo between ships and forward bases. The aircraft's ability to take off from short, improvised strips, combined with its reliability, made it a natural choice for these ad hoc missions. While these roles lacked the drama of torpedo strikes or U-boat hunts, they were vital to the continuity of operations in isolated commands. One of the more eccentric deployments involved Swordfish aircraft operating as flare droppers and signal relay craft during Special Forces insertions along the Norwegian coast. Small detachments of British and Norwegian operatives, transported by submarine or motor launch, required aerial support for navigation and coordination during their night raids against German shipping and infrastructure. The Swordfish, flying low along the coast in darkness, would drop flares at prearranged locations or circle designated targets with signal lights, guiding the saboteurs toward their objectives. These missions were executed with extreme risk and near total secrecy. Post-war accounts have also hinted at unofficial or unauthorized modifications by maintenance crews and pilots operating in distant postings. In one documented case, a Swordfish was allegedly modified with an additional fuel tank and a makeshift bomb rack for extended reconnaissance over East Africa. Although this configuration was never standardized, it speaks to the aircraft's structural flexibility and the ingenuity of wartime personnel working with limited resources. Even after the war, the Swordfish continued to serve in unique ceremonial roles. Several aircraft were retained for naval pageants, fleet reviews, and diplomatic flyovers. Their distinctive silhouette and historical association with major wartime victories made them popular icons in both British and Commonwealth military culture. Swordfish aircraft occasionally participated in film productions, historical reenactments, and commemorative parades, providing living memory of a bygone era of aviation. These overlooked missions and unconventional uses reveal the full extent of the Swordfish's utility beyond its traditional combat record. They portray a machine that was not just a weapon, but a platform, a foundation upon which the varied needs of war could be met with creativity and resourcefulness. From clandestine raids to instructional flights, from radar training to flare drops in enemy territory, the Swordfish proved that even in the margins of war, adaptability and simplicity could generate strategic effect. In this wider perspective, the Swordfish was not merely the biplane that sank a battleship. It was a ubiquitous presence, a tireless workhorse in skies where fame was rare but impact was undeniable. These forgotten chapters form an integral part of its story, illustrating that some of the most profound legacies in war are written not only by grand victories but by endurance, flexibility, and quiet utility. Though the Fairey Swordfish was retired from active service decades ago, its image continues to endure in both military heritage and scholarly analysis. It occupies a rare space among Second World War aircraft, neither celebrated for speed nor power, yet revered for its operational legacy. Historians, engineers, and naval tacticians alike return to the Swordfish as a study in paradox, how an aircraft seemingly obsolete at the moment of its birth could go on to define critical moments in maritime warfare. In academic circles, the Swordfish is often referenced in discussions about the economics of war production. Its simple construction meant that it could be manufactured at scale, maintained without heavy infrastructure, and adapted across theaters. When compared to more modern aircraft that demanded intensive training, complex maintenance, and specialized components, the Swordfish represented a cost-effective solution that delivered measurable results. In the historiography of World War II, the Swordfish's defining moment, its crippling attack on the German battleship Bismarck, continues to receive critical reassessment. Military historians now regard the operation not merely as a fluke of torpedo luck, but as a demonstration of the maturity of British naval aviation doctrine. The success of that mission, and of others like Taranto, is increasingly attributed to precise planning, crew coordination, and the flexible use of available tools rather than technological superiority. The Swordfish then becomes not just a symbol of underdog success, but of how doctrine and human factors can amplify capability. In modern naval aviation training, the legacy of the Swordfish lives on in the emphasis placed on crew communication, low-speed maneuvering, and the tactical value of all-weather persistence. It is often cited in lectures and publications that stress the importance of adaptability and mission-centric design. The aircraft has also found a place in studies of innovation under constraint, how limitations in resources or design can, when approached creatively, lead to enduring strategic advantages. Publicly, the aircraft has grown into a cultural icon. The distinct profile of the Swordfish, long wings, fixed undercarriage, torpedo slung beneath, remains one of the most recognizable silhouettes of the Royal Navy's aerial arm. Models, posters, postage stamps, and commemorative coins feature its likeness, not simply as a nod to nostalgia, but as an emblem of endurance and impact. Museums across Europe and the Commonwealth continue to display preserved examples, many of which draw significant interest not just from aviation enthusiasts, but from general audiences seeking connection with a pivotal era in history. The restoration of flyable Swordfish aircraft in recent decades has created a powerful visual and acoustic reminder of the aircraft's role. Their appearances at air shows, fleet commemorations, and Remembrance Day flyovers evoke not only admiration but reflection. The slow, steady sound of the Bristol Pegasus engine cutting across the sky brings with it a reminder of the era when the Royal Navy fought with what it had and prevailed through resolve, improvisation, and duty. Today, the Fairey Swordfish is no longer viewed through the lens of irony or quaintness. It is studied, preserved, and honored for what it truly represents: the capacity of well-trained crews, clear doctrine, and versatile tools to achieve decisive outcomes, even in the face of technological disadvantage. It challenges assumptions about progress in military aviation and reminds planners and historians alike that the value of a weapon system cannot be measured by speed or glamour alone. In the wider arc of military history, the Swordfish is a case study in how adaptability, perseverance, and effective doctrine can defy expectations. It left behind no superlative records of air-to-air victories or high-speed chases. Instead, it helped win wars through discipline, coordination, and repeated success in roles for which it was never originally designed. And in doing so, it secured its place not just in the skies of the past, but in the long memory of strategic thought. From a technical and maintenance standpoint, the Fairey Swordfish was remarkable not for complexity, but for its mechanical simplicity and operational resilience. In an era where aircraft performance was often driven by rapid technological evolution, the Swordfish stood apart as an engineering solution, deliberately crafted to prioritize maintainability, robustness, and adaptability over raw performance. Constructed primarily from metal tubing and fabric covering, the Swordfish's structure could absorb significant punishment and still remain airworthy. This robustness was a significant asset in carrier operations, where hard deck landings, salt corrosion, and limited facilities placed enormous stress on airframes. The undercarriage, fixed and reinforced, reduced mechanical failure rates common in retractable landing gear systems of the era, particularly under maritime conditions. Though this feature added drag and reduced speed, it drastically improved survivability and repairability. Maintenance crews working aboard Royal Navy carriers appreciated the aircraft's accessibility. Critical components such as the engine, control linkages, and fuel systems were easily reachable and often serviceable with basic tools. This trait became crucial in operational theaters such as the Arctic convoys or Mediterranean patrols, where supply chains were thin and conditions harsh. The engine, usually a Bristol Pegasus radial, was known for its reliability and could operate effectively under varied environmental conditions, from tropical humidity to sub-zero North Atlantic exposure. Simplicity in avionics also played a role in reducing maintenance cycles. With few complex electrical systems on board, the Swordfish was less prone to technical failure than its contemporaries. Communication gear, navigation instruments, and weapon release systems were functional but intentionally basic. The lack of complexity allowed ground crews to keep the aircraft in operational readiness with minimal diagnostic tools. This low maintenance profile proved especially beneficial when Swordfish aircraft were deployed from merchant converted escort carriers, many of which lacked the full complement of aviation support facilities. Damage recovery and field repairs were common, and the aircraft's design facilitated such improvisations. In numerous recorded cases, fabric tiers were patched with doped canvas, wooden wing spars were replaced on site, and bent metal elements were straightened or substituted with locally sourced materials. Mechanics often adapted non-standard components to keep the aircraft flying, an act of field ingenuity made possible only by the forgiving nature of the Swordfish's structure. Another frequently cited advantage was the aircraft's ease of engine servicing. The Pegasus engine, air-cooled and modular, allowed for quick component swaps, cylinder changes, and ignition tuning. Engine overhauls could be done faster than with liquid-cooled inline engines like the Rolls-Royce Merlin, which dominated other aircraft classes. For carrier crews operating under tight schedules and exposed decks, this meant more sorties and less downtime. Operational data confirmed the platform's mechanical endurance. In many squadrons, Swordfish aircraft flew extended operational hours with minimal unplanned maintenance. Scheduled inspections, particularly the 50-hour and 100-hour checks, revealed lower wear levels than on more modern but fragile aircraft. Even after absorbing flak, shrapnel, or sea spray damage, Swordfish units often returned to base and were repaired overnight. Their robustness was so trusted that some aircraft flew multiple patrols per day over months-long periods. The aircraft's ease of adaptation to secondary roles further reflected its technical versatility. engineers added floats for seaplane trials, external racks for smoke markers, flares, mines, and depth charges, and even experimental radar antennas. Each modification was enabled by a platform with ample structural capacity and forgiving aerodynamics. It was not uncommon for squadrons to configure aircraft differently depending on mission profiles. Torpedo bomber one day, ASW or flare dropper the next, without needing factory-level retrofitting. In sum, the Fairey Swordfish's technical legacy lies not in innovation, but in execution. It exemplified the principle that dependable equipment designed with maintainers and conditions in mind could have a strategic impact equal to that of the most advanced platforms. Its longevity in service, resistance to failure, and adaptability under pressure made it one of the most mechanically successful aircraft in British naval history. For mechanics, it was a machine that could be trusted. For operations officers, it was a known quantity. And for pilots, it was a lifeline that would likely bring them home, even in the most punishing circumstances. When evaluating the Fairey Swordfish alongside its contemporaries, the contrast is immediately striking. By the late 1930s and early 1940s, the world's major air forces were fielding increasingly advanced monoplanes, sleek, all-metal, faster, and better armed. In this rapidly modernizing arena, the Swordfish, a biplane with a maximum speed of around 220 km/h and an open cockpit, seemed a relic from a previous war. Yet this very anachronism became a surprising advantage in certain operational environments, and the aircraft outlasted or outperformed its more advanced rivals in specific roles. Against aircraft like the German Junkers Zhuhai 87 Stuka or the American Douglas TBD Devastator, the Swordfish offered a different profile. The Stuka, with its dive-bombing precision, was optimized for quick, concentrated strikes, particularly in early war blitzkrieg scenarios. However, it required air superiority to operate effectively, became increasingly vulnerable as Allied fighter capabilities improved. The Devastator, designed as a torpedo bomber for the U.S. Navy, entered service with optimism, but performed poorly during the Battle of Midway in 1942 and was withdrawn soon after. Both aircraft, despite being more modern than the Swordfish, proved fragile in extended campaigns. In contrast, the Swordfish, with its slow cruising speed and high maneuverability at low altitudes, thrived in conditions where others failed. Its low stall speed allowed it to operate from smaller decks and rough airfields. Its robustness under fire and mechanical reliability gave it staying power in theaters ranging from the Arctic to the Indian Ocean. While it could not match the performance of frontline fighters or dive bombers, it did not need to. It operated primarily in a tactical niche where simplicity, endurance, and versatility mattered more than speed. The most famous test of this paradox occurred during the attack on the Bismarck. German anti-aircraft gunners trained to track faster aircraft often miscalculated their lead against the much slower Swordfish torpedo bombers. This, combined with the aircraft's ability to fly low and avoid radar detection, allowed the British strike force to disable the battleship's rudder, one of the most decisive naval blows of the war. No aircraft of similar vintage or category had such a strategic impact on the course of a major naval campaign. British aviation also fielded aircraft like the Fairey Albacore and Barracuda to replace the Swordfish, both of which were technically superior. However, neither achieved the reliability or operational flexibility of the older biplane. The Albacore, for example, suffered from poor crew visibility and limited deck handling traits, while the Barracuda was plagued by engine troubles and required higher levels of maintenance. In practice, squadrons often preferred to retain their Swordfish aircraft for missions where dependability was paramount. Even in the face of modern opposition, such as the Focke-Wulf F-190 or the Messerschmitt Bf-109, the Swordfish maintained operational viability, not by confronting them directly, but by exploiting the gaps between air superiority zones. Its missions were typically conducted at night under cloud cover or in heavily escorted formations. It avoided head-to-head combat and instead relied on strategic surprise, environmental camouflage, and coordination with fleet assets. From an industrial standpoint, the Swordfish also compared favorably in terms of cost and production efficiency. Its relatively simple construction meant that it could be built with less critical material and labor than cutting-edge aircraft. In wartime Britain, where resource allocation was constantly under pressure, this gave the Swordfish an extended production life. Factories like Blackburn Aircraft continued to build new units into 1944, long after the aircraft's original design date, because it remained strategically valuable and logistically convenient. In conclusion, the Fairey Swordfish was never the fastest, deadliest, or most modern aircraft of its generation. Yet when judged by performance in role, adaptability, survivability, and strategic contribution, it stands at the top tier of World War II naval aviation. While more advanced aircraft came and went, the Swordfish endured, an emblem of how intelligent doctrine and operational experience can extract victory, not from superiority, but from sufficiency refined into excellence. The biplane that should have been obsolete was instead indispensable, rewriting the rulebook on what makes an aircraft effective in total war.